It all started on a hot summer afternoon. I was just trying to enjoy a peaceful day in my own backyard, floating in the pool with some inflatable toys I'd picked up for the weekend. Nothing crazy, just a couple of fun floaties and a beach ball. But then, out of nowhere, she showed up. You probably know the type. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on like she's about to interrogate someone. Yep, the HOA Karen. She marched right into my yard like she owned the place, yelling about unauthorized pool accessories and claiming they violated HOA guidelines. I tried to stay calm, but before I could even respond, she snatched the toys and stormed off like some kind of pool pirate. I figured that would be the end of it. But then, not even 10 minutes later, she called 911 over pool toys. I couldn't believe it. The cops showed up, and I honestly had no idea how it was going to go. Was I actually about to get in trouble for floating on a donut-shaped raft? What happened next totally surprised me, and let's just say, Justice showed up in a blue uniform. But what the officer said to Karen, that was the real twist. Stick around, because you won't believe how this showdown ended. So here I am, standing in my swimsuit, still dripping wet, trying to explain to two very serious-looking officers why a grown woman just made an emergency call over some harmless pool toys. One officer stayed back, looking between me and the gate where Karen had disappeared with my floaties, while the other one asked, "Do you know this woman?" I told them yeah, unfortunately. She's the self-appointed queen of our HOA. Not officially in charge, but she acts like it. She's always nitpicking about grass height, trash cans, and now, inflatable flamingos. The weird part is, I've lived here for years without a single problem. No complaints, no violations. But ever since she moved in across the street about 6 months ago, it's been non-stop drama. She once wrote me up because my garden hose was too visible from the street. I kid you not. But this time felt different. The way she stormed off with my stuff, then dragged the police into it, like, who does that? And the cops. They weren't immediately taking sides, which had me kind of nervous. One of them asked to see the HOA rules, which I had printed in a binder just in case. That's when I started to realize, maybe she'd finally gone too far. But then Karen came back and she wasn't alone. Karen strutted back onto my property like she was leading a parade, except right behind her was her friend, one of the actual HOA board members. Great. Now it wasn't just about pool toys. This was turning into some kind of HOA showdown. She waved her phone in the air, claiming she had video proof that my pool sit-up was bringing down neighborhood standards. Meanwhile, the officer talking to me just raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed. Her friend started rattling off some vague HOA rules about visual harmony and approved outdoor decor, but when I handed over my printed copy of the official guidelines, they had nothing to back it up. There was no mention of pool floats, no ban on toys, nothing. I could tell the officers were starting to piece it together. But Karen wasn't backing down. She kept interrupting, raising her voice, talking over me and even the cops. It felt less like a neighborhood complaint and more like she had a personal vendetta. The neighbors started peeking through their blinds, some even stepping out to see what the commotion was about. One guy across the street whispered, "Again. Turns out, I'm not the only one she's targeted." And that's when things started to shift. The officers asked to speak to Karen privately, and whatever they said next had her face go pale. But we're not there yet. Karen stepped off to the side with one of the officers, still clutching her phone like it was a weapon. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but her body language said everything. Arms flailing, pacing in circles, voice getting louder with every sentence. Meanwhile, the other officer stayed with me, flipping through the HOA guidelines I had handed him. He asked a few calm questions, how long I'd lived here, if I'd had any past issues, if I'd ever been formally warned about anything. I told him no, and that I usually just kept to myself. While we were talking, more neighbors started gathering near their driveways, clearly picking up on the drama. A couple gave me supportive nods, and one even whispered, "Finally someone's standing up to her." Apparently, Karen's HOA power trips had a long track record. People just hadn't pushed back before. That gave me a bit of hope, but I still had no idea how this was going to end. Then suddenly, Karen's voice cut through everything, loud, angry, and aimed at the officer. "He's lying. He's making it up." She was pointing at me now, as if I was the one causing chaos. But the officer stayed calm, nodded, and then asked her one question that made her freeze. Her expression dropped, and for the first time, she didn't have a quick comeback. Something had shifted, and I could feel we were heading straight into the moment of truth. Karen stood frozen, mouth slightly open, like the officer had just asked her something she hadn't expected. And he had. He simply said, "Ma'am, do you have permission to enter his property and remove his belongings?" That's when her whole vibe shifted. She stammered something about HOA authority and community enforcement, but it was clear she didn't have an answer. The officer just nodded slowly, jotting something down in his little notebook. And that's when the second twist hit hard. From behind the group of neighbors, a man stepped forward I hadn't seen before. Turns out he was new to the block, but he also happened to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, either an HOA compliance attorney. He introduced himself calmly and said he'd been watching everything from across the street. Then he dropped the bombshell. Karen wasn't just overstepping. She might have broken trespassing and property interference rules. His words carried weight, and for the first time, the HOA board member looked uncomfortable too. The officer glanced between the lawyer, Karen, and me, clearly starting to connect the dots. But Karen wasn't done. She suddenly claimed I had been harassing her for weeks, that I had intimidated her. It was a wild accusation, and completely made up. Now things weren't just about pool toys anymore. They were about credibility, legal boundaries, and whether Karen had just made her biggest mistake yet. The moment Karen accused me of harassment, everything got quiet. Even the neighbors, who had been whispering and filming from a distance, stopped talking. The officer raised his eyebrows, clearly trying to stay neutral, but now this wasn't just about HOA rules. It was turning into a legal situation. The lawyer neighbor stepped forward again and asked if Karen had any proof of her claims. She looked around, caught off guard, then pulled out her phone. But instead of showing videos of me doing anything wrong, all she had were clips of my pool, with floaties in it. That was it. The officer took one look, turned to me, and asked if I wanted to file a report for stolen property. I honestly hadn't even thought that far ahead, but before I could respond, Karen snapped. She started yelling about how the neighborhood was falling apart and how people like me don't respect the community. That's when the board member finally stepped in, not to support her, but to say they'd be holding a special HOA meeting to review her behavior. That alone felt like a huge shift. But the twist? As the officers wrapped up, one of them told me something off the record. I wasn't the first person Karen had called the cops on. She'd made 5 similar calls in the past 2 months. Turns out, might have been the last straw. The officer took one look, turned to me, and asked if I wanted to file a report for stolen property. I honestly hadn't even thought that far ahead, but before I could respond, Karen snapped. She started yelling about how the neighborhood was falling apart and how people like me don't respect the community. That's when the board member finally stepped in, not to support her, but to say they'd be holding a special HOA meeting to review her behavior. That alone felt like a huge shift. But the twist? As the officers wrapped up, one of them told me something off the record. I wasn't the first person Karen had called the cops on. She'd made 5 similar calls in the past 2 months. Turns out, might have been the last straw. Something off the record. I wasn't the first person Karen had called the cops on. She'd made 5 similar calls in the past 2 months. Turns out, might have been the last straw.